Good morning, everyone. Today is October the 8th, and I am Jen Bordeaux with New Direction Family Law, coming at you with another segment of Family Law Uncorked. My guest today is no stranger to New Direction. We have had her on other Facebook Lives before because she always brings such valuable and great information to our audience. So we brought her back today to talk about some tips and how to talk to your kids about divorce. And so my guest today is Dr. Katrina Kuzyszyn-Jones. And I always remember how to say it because you're like Kuzyszyn, like musician, but with a K. So I'm like, okay. And she is with the KKJ Forensic and Psychological Services out of Durham. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So before we jump into great knowledge and tips that you'd like to share with about parents, talking to their kids about divorce, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice and how you got into it.
Sure. So in our practice, we probably focus about 90% of our practice on families who are going through separation and divorce. And we do that in a variety of ways with court evaluations, also individual and family therapy, working in as a parenting coordinator, things like that. And I actually had no idea about family law at the very beginning. My background is in criminal law. It's what I got my master's degree in. And then when I was at UNC doing a practicum, it was back when UNC had the Forensic Psychiatry Service, and it was family law. And I was like, what is this? And it just stuck. So
yeah, it's a whole other animal, that is for sure. And I don't think, just kind of a sidebar, like you generally don't know family law, like what that is as like a niche of an area of law practice. I mean, you hear about obviously divorce, especially, with celebrity couples and things like that. But otherwise, unless you are going through a family law matter, like a child custody situation or, the whole kit caboodle of divorce, and separation, everything that goes with that, you don't really have a reason to know about family law, right?
Right.
So that's a good point. But we always enjoy, because there's not too many practices in the area that do the extensive custody evaluations and are really willing to testify in court. And rightly so. It's not fun, right? Like going to court to testify isn't necessarily fun, but sometimes it's absolutely necessary for, depending upon the custody situation. So we appreciate all that you do and the wonderful therapists. We've had the opportunity to meet some of the other therapists that you have there in your practice. And it's just, you got a good thing going on over there. So we appreciate all the different ways that we've been able to work with you and support our clients and everything. So
thank you.
With that being said, we'll jump into today's topic about talking to your kids about divorce. And I think that this is so important because I see on a daily basis, we all do, at New Direction, a daily basis of this can be really, really difficult. You're untangling emotions as a spouse that you're feeling. And if there's kids there, then, it might be really hard to separate the feelings that you're having towards your soon to be ex. And now you've got to somehow separate that from, the way that you talk to your kids about it. And obviously there's, depending upon the age of your kids and how you would approach that subject and questions they might have. So, getting divorced is a grown-up decision, but talking to your kids should be very child appropriate. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're the expert, not me.
Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think the thing that makes it particularly hard is, like you said, you are overwhelmed with your own emotions. Depending on the age of your children, oftentimes parents, when kids are older, feel like they need to provide a lot more background and explanation than is really good for their kids. Whether it's that they don't want to look like the bad guy, or they think they want their kids to know, what the other parent did, so that they don't think of, I'm not choosing to leave the marriage. This is what your other parent did, right? And that's really not good for kids. Really, what kids need to know is that our marriage is not working out. We had the best thing that came out of our marriage was you, or you all, right? Depending on how many children there are. And we love you, and that won't change. The way that we all live together will change. And so being able to talk about the more kind of practical implications of that. And particularly older children will try to draw you out, right? And ask you, why are you getting divorced? What happened? And like kind of putting it on repeat or having a couple of different ways that you say it so you don't feel like a broken record, but being a broken record and saying some version of, it's not really appropriate for us to tell you about that. That's between me and mom or me and dad. We don't want you to be worried about the adult stuff. We want you to know we love you and that we're going to do our best to take care of you.
Yeah. And I think, and do you think that this is, an ongoing conversation? I mean, especially depending upon the age, whenever the separation is initiated, if you've got a 5-year-old, I mean, so this is going to be a lot of change for them, not only in the immediate situation with the separation, but then as they, become older and have their own emotions and things that they're dealing with, and they have school. Well, under normal conditions, they're going to school, and their kids, their friends might, bring it up if they notice the difference and, things like that. So, would you say this is an ongoing conversation, and what are some of the most important pieces of that ongoing conversation with your children?
Yeah, it definitely should be an ongoing conversation. I think a lot of parents get really nervous about the first conversation and like, what's the right time of day and how do we say it and when do we say it and who is there? And those things are important, right? Like you want to think about not talking to your kids at 9 o'clock at night, right? Because you don't want them to be upset before they're going to sleep or when they should be asleep, depending on their age. You do want to think about doing something, like a Friday morning. If it's a long weekend, that's even better. Not over the holidays. A lot of people will think, oh, well, there's downtime, but that kind of ruins your holiday, right? So there are things to consider in that first conversation, but really it's then what, right? In the first conversation, the kids either will have no idea what you're talking about and kind of gloss it over and you need to come back to them. Or they'll get really angry or really sad, right? They might have really big emotions and then you have to deal with that. And that's not really dealing with the divorce. That's just dealing with whatever they're experiencing in the moment. So being able to come back to them a couple of days later, depending on the kid, maybe a day later, but a couple of days later, kind of reopening the door for, I know this is probably upsetting news. Do you want to talk about it? Really open-ended versus, are you upset? Yes, no, right? Who do you want to live with? Don't start in on that type of thing, really keeping it open, allowing them to have whatever feelings they're going to have. And I think over time and through different developmental stages, kids have different questions. So if you separate when your kid is 5, by the time they get to, kind of later elementary school or middle school, they have a very different concept of what marriage is and what divorce is, and even who parents are as people. And they start to see our flaws, right? The older they get, the more flawed we become. And so then they also might start talking to you about the other parent's flaws. And that's something that you have to be careful that even if you agree, right? Like, oh my God, dad's always late, or mom can never, pack my lunch the right way, that you don't feed into that thinking that, oh, they're seeing it. It's really important to still maintain that it's important to have a good relationship with both parents. You can validate what their experience is, talk about it's really frustrating when you don't get what you want for lunch, rather than, yeah, your parent has never been good at packing lunches, right?
Yeah, and that might be so hard, right? Like as the spouse of the situation, to not want to just jump on that bandwagon of, bashing the other parent, but it is so important not to do that. Like I said, sometimes we see it on a daily basis of parents that we wish would get help with the co-parenting situation, or would kind of try to keep that piece in check. And because, you know, your heart just goes out to the kids, because even if they like, you know, that like, oh yeah, mom or dad agrees with me that the other parent, it does X, Y, and Z wrong. It also, I mean, I would think would just fester into things later on, and then maybe the kid goes back and tells the other parent, yeah, well, mom or dad said that you did this too. And then, you know, then you're just at odds, just creating all kinds of animosity there.
And I think the other piece of this too is there's you don't know how your kid identifies themselves as part of you and part of the other parent, right? They might not necessarily know, but if you start talking about something as bad in the other parent, like they're disorganized, and then the kid struggles in school to be organized, then even if you've never said you're just like your mom or you're just like your dad, you can never get something right. That's how they start to interpret it, which is really harmful if they're, you know, kind of a normal kid viewing themselves as part of each of their parent, and then the bad things about the other parent because bad stuff about them. So even though you're really just trying to join with them around what their struggle is with the other parent, you're kind of setting up the stage for them to think, oh, that's something I'm not good at too. You know?
Yeah. So, you know, and I would say, you know, kids that are, you know, either later elementary and into middle school, I mean, while the conversation, yes, it needs to be age appropriate, at least at that point, you are able to have, you know, a legit conversation with, you know, just developmentally more so. So how do you address it with younger children, that maybe that communication piece, you know, the vocal communication piece or the discussion isn't necessarily quite an option yet to that level? Because I know I've heard several therapists say, you know, no matter how young the kids are, they know that something is going on. You know, like if there is emotional disruption in the home, you know, kind of this bubbling effect that separation is imminent. So to speak, that kids know, no matter how old they are, you know, obviously they express it in different ways. So how, looking at that, I mean, in my mind, honesty is the best policy. Like, you don't want to try to hide it from the kids that something is necessarily going on. Again, not going into all the details of everything behind the scenes as to why, but how do you address that with younger ones that maybe aren't quite as communicative yet?
I mean, I think really it's keeping it as simple as possible, right? Whatever your family circumstances are, me and your mom or dad are not going to live together anymore. You're going to live with both of us different days of the week, especially for little kids, not different amounts of time, different days of the week. If you think about all of these kids, you know, kids have songs for different days of the week, right? And we're going to put a calendar on the refrigerator so that you know who you're going to see when, and that's it. And then it's like small bits of information over time rather than kind of overloading on. And then at Christmas, this is what we're going to do. As things come up, being able to transition into, hey, something new is going to happen this year for Christmas, or hey, you know, this is how we're going to handle your birthday. And particularly for young kids, not giving them the sense that they have an option is important, because that can be overwhelming. So there's a difference between, hey, do you want to have, you know, Dora the Explorer or a Barbie party? Nobody does Barbie parties, but you know what I'm saying? Like a princess party or a Dora party.
Yeah.
Like, do you want to do that is different than how do you want to have your birthday? I'm 4. I don't know. Give me options, right? And so the same thing happens with, we're going to do something different for, you know, the holidays this year. You're going to spend this amount of time with me and this amount of time with your other parent. I was thinking we could go skiing or go sledding or, you know, go visit grandma and grandpa or something like that. And that's where the choice and involvement can come in, and having it be about the fun stuff rather than who do you want to spend Christmas with? Oh,
yeah,
both of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Santa, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we've been, you know, one thing that we try to talk about during this time of, co-parenting and everything during the time of quarantine. And granted, people are able to get out a little bit more now than when, back in March and April and May and everything, but we were still, we've used the term unprecedented because that's how the courts are. I mean, so much is, but courts are too. And there's no case law on custody decisions during a pandemic. There will be after all of this is said and done, for sure. But our biggest advice from the legal standpoint is, abide by the custody order if there is one in place to the best of your ability. Of course, it is safe, but above all of that, communicate with the other parent, because your kid is dealing with this too in their own way, but dealing with the exchanges and all the uncertainty and not being able to go to school. And so, if there are health concerns, if one parent may have been exposed, or, having a plan if someone is, does test positive, things like that. So communication, as tough as it may be, you may not want to talk to that person, but you are forever tied to them. So that's been our big thing. So from the start of that, how important, or, what maybe advice or tips would you give to parents that have decided to separate in initiating that conversation? I mean, I'd imagine it would be, be on the same page. Would you say best practice would be to talk to the child together about it, or, because that might not be an option for some.
Yeah. I mean, I think to the extent that you believe you can have the conversation and stay on the same page and not have somebody kind of go rogue, then it is better for it to be the entire family unit. Because what you want your children to understand is that you will be a family unit. Even though you're not going to be a couple anymore, you're still a family unit. Even if that leaves a bad taste in your mouth as the spouse, it's still the reality is that you're a family unit, right? So having that conversation together to the extent that you can, I think is really helpful. Then it can be more individualized conversations. And if there's a big thing that needs to be brought up, if you've been, like, some people will kind of nest at the beginning, particularly with younger kids where they're moving in and out of the house. Then at some point, somebody finally moves out. Then at some point, the children will go over to that other place, right? So those are kind of the transitional time periods where you may need to have another family meeting. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that there's a fine line between communicating about what's going on and communicating about why it's happening. And so that's where you want to continue to have conversations with each other and with the kids and try to keep it really factually based to the extent that you can.
Okay. Yeah, that's good advice. So when looking at kids, is that, we talked about that it's going to be an ongoing conversation. So as kids, age and like you said, they start identifying, what a parent is, and, they're navigating this whole, 2 homes now. Because I would imagine as a parent, I don't have children. My parents were divorced. But how, because there's questions that kids are going to ask, right? Whether, like you said, it's immediately in reaction to the discussion or as they continue to process things for years on down the road, honestly. So what advice do you have for parents for some of those questions that can be taken so personally? Let's say, if the child or children are with mom and it's, mom's custodial time, so to speak, but they're like, man, we really want to go see dad tomorrow, but it's not that scheduled time. Like, what advice do you have for parents in digesting that themselves and trying not to take it personally and honoring the way that the kids are feeling about the other parent?
I think it's helpful to have some language kind of at the ready, right? So that you're not taken by surprise and you can't anticipate everything that a kid's going to say. But there are things that like that, right? I want to talk with the other parent. I want to see the other parent. The other parent said such and such about you. whatever the case may be. Those kinds of things you can kind of have a line of, I can understand that you miss the other parent. Would you like to have a phone call? Right? I can understand that you want to see the other parent. That's not really going to work out for us right now. Do you want to do a FaceTime? Right? So something where you're getting at, they're just missing the other person, and it's not about them not wanting to be with you. But kids have parents that they're more or less connected to in any given moment, right? And so it may be, this was like the best soccer game ever, and that's the other parent who loves sports. It could be as simple as that, right? It doesn't have to be that you don't like sports. It's just that parent really loves sports, and so I want to share this with them. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. I think if it's, some version of, I don't like what you're doing, or the other parent is saying that you're doing something wrong, being able to get at I bet it's hard for there to be times where you're not sure how to talk to me about the divorce, or your bedtime rules, or your electronic time. And maybe there are differences between households, but keeping the focus on, but let's talk about that, right? So are you upset about something? Are you sad about something? What's the underlying feeling? And trying to get at that piece rather than being focused on the content of what they're talking about.
Makes sense. And we've done part of the last Facebook Live that you joined us for. We talked about parent coordinators and the roles that those can play in high conflict custody situations. And so that's a whole nother discussion on, because you touched on, like what the bedtime is at the other parent's house. And so that's a whole other discussion. And for those watching now or later, I invite you to check out that video as well. We've done some other segments about kind of focusing on what you can control, which is what happens whenever the kids are with you, kind of thing. So I think that's great. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but one of the last couple questions I have for you, and you kind of touched on some of this earlier, and again, it's going to depend on age of the child or children, but what behaviors might parents see in a reaction to the separation and divorce, either once that conversation has happened and for time to come?
Mm-hmm. So it can be a little bit different for boys and girls, although you don't want to be kind of overly stuck in thinking of it that way, because, people are people and they do all sorts of things. But I think really the thing to pay attention to is there a change in behavior? So do you have a star student who's suddenly not doing well in school? And, do you have somebody who's really outgoing, who's suddenly withdrawing, or somebody who's more introverted, who suddenly wants to be around people a lot? That would be just as strange, right, as in the other direction, if that's not that kid's personality. I think looking at, it's normal for there to be more sadness. It's normal for there to be some sense of wondering, have I done something wrong? And being really careful to reinforce that you haven't done anything wrong. There are times where there's stress in the marriage or in the partnership related to the child's behavior or special needs. And then you really have to be careful, right? That you are saying it is not about your whatever it is that's happening with that child. It's about how, mom and I or dad and I are dealing with that, right? We aren't doing that together very well. That's not about you. That's about us. And throwing yourself under the bus as much as you can, right?
Yeah.
I think thinking along the lines of, is there a difficulty in school? Is there a more sadness, more withdrawn behavior, more kind of acting out behavior? Keeping your eyes on who the kids are hanging out with, especially if they're older. Are they hanging out with a crowd that's different? Because that can be a sign that there's something going on. And if they want to spend more time alone in their room, allowing a little bit of that while still engaging, so that you're not giving them the sense of, yeah, just go take care of this by yourself, right? Like you want to give them enough space to have their feelings, sometimes in private, and then kind of reach back out and say, I've noticed that you've been spending a lot of time in your room. Let's talk about what's happening. You know?
Yeah. I mean, and I'll say, I mean, obviously these are all great tips and things to expect and information that you're sharing. And me personally, when my parents were divorced, I think I was 7 when they separated. And even they co-parented great. I mean, part of it was probably because my dad was, and it moved to a different state, and my mom was here with my brother and I, but they both still, communicated how much, they really tried to remove any sorts of feelings of guilt from my brother and I. Now, even as much as they did, there were still times, I remember as a kid, being like, if I just would have been better, if I wouldn't have made mom and dad mad about this or whatever, and so it's just, it's natural, but I think it is going to take, even if you are communicating to your kids, like it's going to take frequency in mentioning that and reiterating that and making sure that you're fielding those questions and letting them know that it is in no way, their fault, because it's, just going through it myself, I remember it's very easy to think that you're the cause,
Mm-hmm.
So I love all of that. And I just want to say that some of this sounds a lot easier said than done, especially depending upon your situation with the other parent and, just your personality and, any aversion to conflict and things like that, because having these conversations can be hard. So you're not alone. That's what Dr. K is here for, and other practitioners in her practice. So they can help, parents on an individual level, help with co-parenting, as well as with children individually, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So with that being said, what is the best way for people to get in contact with you if they're interested in services or talking about any of these things or any other mental health support they might need?
Well, right now, the best way to reach us is via email, because while I am in the office, I'm usually in the middle of doing something or working with a family or somebody. And so the phone hasn't been the best way to reach us if you need something quick. So going ahead and sending me an email, and I can make sure that it gets to the right person. My email is Dr. Katrina, DrKatrina at KKJ Psych, which is PSYCH.com. So Dr. Katrina at KKJPsych.com. I like things long.
Yeah. Well, and we have your contact information. So anyone, if you reach out directly to us through Facebook or wherever you watch this, we're happy to get you in contact as well. And even though you guys are based out of Durham, I mean, I would imagine you're doing pretty much all telehealth.
We are. Mm-hmm. And for co-parenting, that's something that we did previous to COVID. Being able to do conference calls or teleconferences can be easier for a lot of parents to not have to be in the room with each other, but still have open dialogue and have somebody there to help kind of mediate that. I will say that there are a lot of people who think they prefer to be in the room together, and then they do it and they're like, oh no, this might be better. I like this, right? So
yeah. Well, I think that's great. And I think that's my biggest takeaway is one, how important it is for talking to kids about divorce and not just having it happen and see what happens after the fact. I mean, they need to know they're a big part of this, and for all of these reasons and more that we have discussed today. And then the second biggest takeaway for me is that parents and their kids are not alone in doing this. Like, separation and divorce can be a very traumatic experience. It is a very transitional point in life. And there is a lot that has to be, untangled and dealt with and addressed. I mean, mentally, emotionally, it can take a toll on you physically, financially, and then you've got the whole legal side of it. So it is a lot, and we don't take that lightly. And so that's why we love having great colleagues and partners like you guys that really get it and know that there's so much to it. And especially when there's kids involved, and keeping the focus on, helping to keep those kids happy and healthy throughout the whole process as well. So I really
say you don't have to be perfect in the
yes.
process. That's important too, right? Yes, there are ways you can handle it that are better than others, but you don't have to be perfect. And if you make a mistake, you make a repair.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I'll keep that in mind for my dog since I'm a dog mom. I don't have to be a perfect dog mom. No, but Dr. K, thank you so much again for joining us today and for all the information that you shared with us once again. And for those watching, again, if you need to get in contact with her, you're welcome to contact me directly through Facebook or any other avenue, and we will get in contact with her or give you her information if you didn't catch it here. So as always, such a pleasure, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.